I turned 68 alone, staring at a small grocery store cake with my name spelled slightly wrong, Isabella. I didn't bother correcting it. My daughter, Emily Carter, hadn't called. Not a text. Not even a missed call I could pretend I'd missed.
I wish you were here.
I watched the clock tick past midnight and blew out the candles myself, whispering a wish I no longer believed in. 3 days later, I stood frozen in front of a hospital building as they unveiled a brand new wing with my name on it. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know who I was. If you're listening to my story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Have you ever felt forgotten by someone you love? I'd really like to hear your story. And if this moment already touched something in your heart, please like and subscribe so you don't miss what really happened next. After my husband, Thomas Morrison, passed away, the house became too quiet in a way I still can't fully explain. It wasn't just the absence of his voice or the way the television no longer hummed in the evenings. It was the kind of silence that settles into your bones, the kind that makes even your own footsteps feel like an intrusion. We had lived in that small house in Columbus, Ohio, for over 30 years. Every corner carried a memory, birthday dinners, arguments that ended in laughter, late-night conversations about our daughter Emily. After he was gone, I told myself I would stay strong. I had spent my whole life being strong, but strength feels very different when no one is there to witness it. At first, Emily tried. She called every other day. Sometimes she'd stop by on Sundays bringing store-bought cookies she knew I liked. She would sit at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone, half listening as I talked about my day. Even then, something had already begun to change, though I couldn't quite name it. "Mom, you don't have to worry so much about everything," she said one afternoon, barely looking up. "You should just relax. Enjoy your time." I remember smiling at her, even though her words felt like a quiet dismissal. I had spent decades not relaxing, working long hospital shifts, caring for her father, making sure she had everything she needed. I didn't know how to simply relax, but I nodded anyway, because that's what mothers do. The real shift came after she married Daniel Carter. At first, Daniel was polite, charming even, the kind of man who knew exactly what to say at dinner and when to laugh at the right moments. He wore expensive watches and spoke confidently about investments, real estate, and building a future. I remember thinking Emily had chosen someone stable, someone successful. But there was something else too, something colder beneath the surface. The first time I noticed it clearly was during a family dinner shortly after their wedding. I had cooked for hours roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, just the way Emily liked them. Daniel took one bite, nodded, and said, "It's good, very traditional." There was nothing wrong with his words, but the way he said them made it feel like I had just been politely placed in a category. Old, outdated, irrelevant. Emily laughed lightly. "Mom loves doing things the old-fashioned way." I smiled again because that's what I always did. But something inside me tightened. Over the next few months, the visits became less frequent. "Daniel and I are really busy this week," Emily would say over the phone. "We've got a lot going on. Maybe next time, Mom." There was always a next time, until there wasn't. I started noticing the small changes first. The way Emily's voice sounded distracted, like she was always halfway somewhere else. The way she would cut our calls short, saying she had something important to attend to. And then came the missed calls. I would dial her number and let it ring, listening to the familiar tone echo through the empty house. Sometimes it went straight to voicemail. Other times it rang long enough to give me hope before it stopped. "Hi, Mom. Sorry I missed your call," she would text hours later. "I'll call you later." But later rarely came. One afternoon, I drove past her neighborhood. I told myself I was just in the area running errands. But the truth was, I wanted to see her. Maybe even catch a glimpse of my granddaughter Sophie playing in the yard. I parked down the street feeling like a stranger in a place I should have belonged. Their house was beautiful, bigger than anything Thomas and I had ever owned. Freshly painted, perfectly landscaped, with large windows that reflected the afternoon sun. I saw Emily through one of those windows. She was laughing. Not the polite, distracted laugh she gave me on the phone, but a full, genuine laugh. Sophie ran past her, and Daniel followed, holding something in his hands, smiling like everything in his world was exactly as it should be. For a moment, I felt relief. She's happy, I thought. That's all that matters. But then something else crept in. If she was this happy, why didn't she have room for me? I didn't go to the door. Instead, I sat in my car, a little longer, watching a life I was no longer part of, before quietly driving away. The next time I spoke to Emily, I mentioned stopping by. "Oh," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "You should have called first, Mom. We've just been really busy lately." "I didn't want to bother you," I replied softly. "You're not bothering me," she said quickly. Too quickly. "It's just Daniel has a lot on his plate, and Sophie has activities and everything's just scheduled." "I didn't want to bother you," I replied softly. "You're not bothering me," she said quickly. Too quickly. "It's just Daniel has a lot on his plate, and Sophie has activities, and everything's just scheduled." Scheduled. I repeated that word in my mind long after the call ended. I began to realize something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was no longer part of her schedule. Weeks turned into months. Holidays became quieter. Invitations became rarer. And when I did see them, Daniel was always there, present, watchful, subtly guiding every conversation. "Emily, we should get going," he would say, glancing at his watch. "Emily, don't forget we have that meeting. Emily, you promised we'd leave early." It was never said harshly, never overtly controlling, but it was constant, and Emily listened. One evening, I gathered the courage to ask her directly. "Are you happy?" I said during one of our shorter phone calls. There was a pause. "Yes, of course I am," she replied. "Why would you ask that? I just feel like I don't see you anymore." "You're overthinking, Mom," she said, a hint of irritation slipping into her voice. "People grow up. Lives change." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I know," I said quietly. But deep down, I also knew something else. This wasn't just life-changing. This was me being left behind, and I didn't yet understand why. The first time I truly understood that I was being pushed out of my daughter's life, it wasn't because of something Emily said. It was because of something she didn't. It started with a simple message. "Mom, we're having a small get-together this weekend. Sophie's birthday. Just a few friends." I read that message 3 times, waiting for the rest of it, waiting for the invitation that never came. Just a few friends, not family, not me. I sat there at my kitchen table, my phone still in my hand, feeling something inside my chest slowly collapse. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe she assumed I would just show up, that maybe she forgot to include the actual invitation. So I replied carefully, choosing my words. "That sounds lovely. What time should I come by?" There was a long pause before she responded. "Oh, it's actually kind of full already, Mom. Maybe we can celebrate separately." Separately. That word lingered longer than it should have. I typed out a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. In the end, I simply wrote, "Of course, I understand." But I didn't. Not really. That night, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at an old photo hanging on the wall. Emily was 6 years old in that picture, her front teeth missing her smile wide and fearless. I had taken her to the park that day, and she had insisted on climbing the tallest slide, even though she was scared. "Stay there, Mom," she had said. "Don't go anywhere." And I hadn't. I never had. So when did that change? Over the next few weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. I would call, she wouldn't answer. I would text, she would reply hours later if at all. When she did call, it was always brief. "I can't talk long, Mom. I'm in the middle of something. I'll call you back later." But later never came. I began to notice something else, too. Every time I did manage to reach her, Daniel was always nearby. I could hear him in the background, his voice low but firm, like a constant presence shaping everything around him. "Emily, we were running late. Emily, you said you'd finish that today. Emily, don't forget the call at 3. He never spoke directly to me, never said anything openly disrespectful. But his influence was everywhere, woven into the rhythm of her life in a way that left no space for me. One afternoon, I gathered enough courage to bring it up. "Emily," I said gently over the phone, "I feel like I haven't seen you or Sophie in a long time." There was a pause. "We've just been really busy, Mom," she replied. I understand that I said trying to keep my voice steady, but even a short visit would mean a lot. Another pause, longer this time. "I don't think you realize how different things are now." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but even a short visit would mean a lot." Another pause, longer this time. "I don't think you realize how different things are now," she said finally. "We have responsibilities, schedules." "It's not like before." Not like before. Those words hit harder than she probably intended. "I'm not asking for much," I whispered. "Just a little time." "Mom," she said, her tone tightening slightly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Harder. I felt my throat tighten. "I'm just trying to stay connected to my daughter," I said. "You are connected," she replied quickly. "But things change. People move on." Move on. From your mother, I wanted to ask that. I wanted to say so many things, but instead I stayed quiet. Because I could feel it, that invisible wall between us growing thicker with every conversation. A few days later, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time. I drove to their house again. This time, I didn't park down the street. I pulled into the driveway. My hands trembled slightly as I turned off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the front door, trying to gather the courage to walk up and knock. "You're her mother," I told myself. "You don't need permission." But something about that thought didn't feel true anymore. Still, I got out of the car. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last. I could hear voices inside Emily's laughter, Sophie's excited squeals. For a brief second, hope flickered inside me. Maybe this is just in my head, I thought. Maybe everything is still okay. I knocked. The sound echoed louder than I expected. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened. Emily stood there, her smile fading the moment she saw me. "Oh," she said. "Just oh." "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly, trying to keep my voice warm. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by. She hesitated. Just for a second, but it was enough. It's not really a good time, Mom." "Not a good time?" Behind her, I could see Daniel standing in the living room. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable, but unmistakably unwelcoming. "I won't stay long," I said quickly. "I just wanted to see you. And Sophie." At the mention of Sophie, Emily glanced over her shoulder. "Daniel and I have people over," she said. "It's kind of private." "Private?" I nodded slowly, even though my heart felt like it was cracking open. "I understand," I said. I didn't move. For a moment, neither did she. Then Sophie ran into view, her small face lighting up when she saw me. "Grandma!" She tried to run toward the door, but Daniel stepped forward, placing a hand gently but firmly on her shoulder. "Not right now, sweetheart," he said. The door remained only half open. I stood there frozen, watching my granddaughter being held back from me. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Not anger, not yet, but a deep, quiet realization. I was no longer just being forgotten. I was being kept out. "Maybe another time," Emily said, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "Of course," I replied. I turned and walked back to my car, each step heavier than the last. This time, I didn't look back. Because I already knew what I would see. A door closing. And a life that no longer had a place for me. As I drove away, one question kept echoing in my mind. What had I done to deserve this? My birthday had never been about extravagance. Even when Thomas was alive, we kept things simple. A homemade cake, a quiet dinner, sometimes a handwritten card tucked beside my morning coffee. It wasn't the celebration that mattered. It was the feeling of being remembered, seen, loved. So when my 68th birthday approached, I told myself not to expect too much. Life had changed. Emily had her own family now, responsibilities, a different rhythm. Still a small part of me hoped. A call, a message, anything. The morning of my birthday, I woke up earlier than usual. The house felt colder, though the thermostat hadn't changed. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality of the day settle in. 68. I whispered the number to myself, as if saying it out loud might make it feel more real. Or less. I got out of bed slowly, my joints reminding me that time had passed, whether I acknowledged it or not. I made my usual cup of coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the quiet street outside. I kept glancing at my phone. Nothing. Maybe they're waiting until later, I murmured to myself. I tried to keep busy. I tidied the house-folded laundry that didn't really need folding, reorganized the same drawer twice. Anything to distract myself from the silence. By noon, I checked my phone again. Still nothing. No missed calls, no messages. I opened our last conversation, my texts to Emily from a few days ago. Short, careful, trying not to sound like I needed too much. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking it again. "She's just busy," I whispered. I said it over and over like a quiet mantra meant to protect me from something I didn't want to face. Around 2 in the afternoon, I decided to go out. I drove to the grocery store a few miles away, walking slowly through the aisles as if I had all the time in the world. In truth, I didn't want to go home yet. I didn't want to sit in that quiet kitchen waiting for something that might never come. I passed by the bakery section and stopped. There were rows of cakes behind the glass, brightly decorated, layered with frosting, some with cheerful messages already written on tea-hem. "Happy birthday! Congratulations!" There were rows of cakes behind the glass, brightly decorated, layered with frosting, some with cheerful messages already written on them. "Happy birthday! Congratulations!" For someone special. I stood there longer than I should have. Finally, I pointed to a small, simple cake. "Could you write 'Happy Birthday, Isabella' on it?" I asked. The young woman behind the counter smiled politely. Of course. When she handed it back to me a few minutes later, I noticed the spelling. "Isabella, one 'll missing." For a second, I considered asking her to fix it, but I didn't. "It's fine," I said, forcing a small smile, because correcting it felt like asking for something more, and I was already trying not to ask for too much. I drove home with the cake sitting carefully on the passenger seat like something fragile, like something that mattered more than it should have. Back in the kitchen, I placed it on the table and just stood there staring at it. The house was silent again. I checked my phone. Nothing. By early evening, I had set the table. 2 plates, 2 forks. I don't know why I did that. Maybe because a part of me still believed she might walk through the door at any moment, smiling, apologizing for being late. "Sorry, Mom, we got caught up." Maybe she would bring Sophie. Maybe they would laugh, and the day would turn into something warm again. I kept glancing at the clock. 6 o'clock. 7. 8. The light outside faded the sky, turning from pale blue to deep gray. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows through the window. Still nothing. I picked up my phone and opened Emily's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button. Don't be that mother, I told myself. The one who calls and reminds people of what they forgot. The one who makes things awkward. So I put the phone down. I lit the candles instead. Just 2 small ones I found in a drawer, leftovers from years ago. I placed them carefully on the cake and lit them, watching the flames flicker gently in the dim kitchen light. For a moment, I just stood there, alone. The quiet felt louder than anything. I closed my eyes. What do you wish for when you already know it won't come true? I didn't wish for presents or celebrations. I wished for my daughter to remember me. I opened my eyes and blew out the candles in a single breath. The smoke curled upward, thin and fragile, disappearing into the air almost instantly. Just like that. Gone. I sat down at the table and cut myself a small slice of cake. The frosting was too sweet, the texture slightly dry. Or maybe it just tasted that way because I was eating it alone. I took a few bites, then set the fork down. My appetite had vanished. I checked my phone one last time. Nothing. No call. No message. No happy birthday, Mom. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the empty seat across from me. And for the first time, I allowed the truth to settle in without trying to soften it. She didn't forget. She chose not to remember. That realization didn't come with anger. Not immediately. It came with something quieter, something heavier, a deep, aching emptiness that settled in my chest and refused to move. I stayed there for a long time, long after the candles had burned out, long after the cake had gone untouched on the table. Eventually, I stood up, wrapped the rest of it in plastic, and placed it in the refrigerator. As if preserving it might somehow preserve the day. Before going to bed, I picked up my phone one last time. Still nothing. I placed it on the nightstand and turned off the light. The darkness felt complete. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that just a few days later, everything I believed about myself and about what I meant to the world was about to change. Completely. There are moments in life that define you, not because anyone else sees them, but because you carry them quietly, long after the world has moved on. For me, that moment happened in a hospital room more than 25 years ago. I hadn't thought about it in years. Not really. But after my birthday, after that silence settled into something I could no longer ignore, my mind began drifting backward. Not to happier memories, but to the ones I had buried beneath routine and responsibility. The ones that never quite let go. Back then, I was still working as a senior nurse at St. Margaret's Medical Center. It was a demanding job, long hours, constant pressure decisions that sometimes had to be made in seconds. But I loved it. Not because it was easy, because it mattered. I remember that particular night clearly. The emergency room was unusually busy. The kind of night where everything feels slightly off, like something is building just beneath the surface. Doctors moving quickly, nurses exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. And then they brought him in. A young boy, no older than 10. His name was Nathaniel Brooks. He was unconscious when they wheeled him through the doors, his small body barely moving beneath the hospital sheets. His mother was right behind him, her voice trembling as she tried to explain what had happened. "Please," she kept saying, "please, you have to save him." I stepped forward, instinctively slipping into the role I had played thousands of times before. "What happened?" I asked, my voice steady, even as my heart began to race. "He collapsed," she said, tears streaming down her face. He just stopped responding." The doctors moved quickly, assessing his condition. Machines were hooked up, monitors began beeping, numbers flashing across screens that told a story none of us wanted to hear. Severe internal complications, critical, time-sensitive. The attending physician that night, Dr. Reynolds, frowned as he reviewed the initial scans. "This is complicated," he said quietly. "We need to run more tests before we proceed." I knew that tone. Careful, measured, cautious, and sometimes too slow. "Doctor," I said, stepping closer. "He doesn't have time for that." Dr. Reynolds glanced at me, his expression tightening slightly. "We can't make a call without complete information." "We don't have the luxury of complete information," I replied. "His vitals are dropping." There was a brief moment of tension, the kind that happens when protocol and instinct collide. I had seen it before, and I had learned something over the years. Sometimes doing the right thing means stepping outside the lines you've been given. Nathaniel's condition worsened quickly. His breathing became shallow, his pulse erratic. The monitors told us what we already knew: he was slipping away. "We're losing him," one of the nurses said. Dr. Reynolds hesitated. "Just for a second. But a second can be everything." I made a decision. "Prep the OR," I said firmly. The room fell silent for a fraction of a moment. "Isabella." Dr. Reynolds said, his voice sharp. "We don't have authorization. We won't have a patient if we wait for it." I cut in. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. Something in my tone must have reached him. Or maybe it was the look on Nathaniel's mother's face. Pure desperation, the kind that strips away every layer of doubt. "Do it," Dr. Reynolds said finally. The room erupted into motion. We moved fast, faster than protocol would have allowed on any other night. But there are moments when rules feel smaller than the lives in front of you. I stayed with Nathaniel as they prepared him, my hands steady even as my heart pounded against my ribs. I spoke softly, even though I didn't know if he could hear me. "You're going to be okay," I whispered. "You're not alone." The surgery that followed was one of the most intense I had ever been part of. There were complications, unexpected ones, moments where it felt like we might lose him anyway. But we didn't. Somehow, we didn't. Hours later, when the tension finally began to ease, the monitors told a different story. Stable. Weak, but stable. Nathaniel had made it. I remember stepping out of the operating room, exhaustion settling over me like a heavy blanket. Nathaniel's mother was waiting just outside, her eyes searching mine for an answer she was almost too afraid to ask. "He's going to live," I said softly. She broke down right there in the hallway, her relief spilling out in quiet sobs that echoed more deeply than any celebration ever could. She grabbed my hands, holding on to them like I had given her something she could never repay. "Thank you," she whispered. You saved my son? I shook my head gently. No, I said. We all did. But even then, I knew the truth was more complicated than that, because what we had done that night wasn't exactly by the book. In the days that followed, there were questions. Meetings, conversations behind closed doors. Some praised the outcome. Others questioned the decision. You took a risk, one administrator said to me. I made a choice. I replied, a choice that could have cost me everything. My position, my reputation, my career. But Nathaniel was alive. And to me, that was the only thing that mattered. Eventually, the situation settled. No formal punishment, no official recognition either. Just silence. Life moved on. Nathaniel recovered. His family left the hospital, and I returned to my routine, carrying that night with me like a quiet memory no one else seemed to hold on to. I never told Emily about it, not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't feel like something I needed to prove. I was her mother. That should have been enough. Now, sitting alone in my quiet house all these years later, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. Some of the most important things we do in life happen in silence, unseen, unrecognized, until one day they aren't. And when that day comes, the truth has a way of finding its voice. There's a strange thing about sacrifice. When you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel like something noble. It doesn't feel like a choice you should be praised for. It just feels necessary. Like breathing. Like doing what has to be done because no one else will. I never thought of myself as someone extraordinary. I was just Isabella Morrison, a nurse, a wife, a mother. My life was built on small, quiet decisions that no one really noticed. But looking back now, I can see the pattern more clearly. Every time I had to choose between myself and the people I loved, I chose them. Without hesitation. After that night at the hospital, the one where we saved Nathaniel Brooks, something shifted in my career. Not outwardly. On paper, everything stayed the same. I kept my position. I continued my work. I showed up every day and did what I had always done. But behind closed doors, things were different. There were meetings, questions, subtle conversations that never quite said what they meant directly. You made a call that went beyond protocol, one administrator told me. I made a call that saved a life, I replied. He nodded, but there was no approval in his expression. Just acknowledgement and distance. I understood what that meant. I had crossed a line even if it was for the right reason. And in places like hospitals, lines matter. Not because they're always right, but because they exist. For a while, I thought about pushing forward anyway. Climbing higher. Taking on more responsibility. Proving that I belonged in rooms where decisions were made, not just followed. But then Thomas got sick. At first, it was small things. Fatigue. A cough that lingered longer than it should have. Doctor's appointments that turned into more tests, more waiting, more uncertainty. Until one day, it wasn't uncertainty anymore. It was a diagnosis. Serious. Life-changing. The kind of word that doesn't just enter your life, it rearranges it completely. I remember sitting in that doctor's office holding Thomas's hand as the doctor explained everything in careful, measured tones. Treatment options, timelines, risks. I didn't hear most of it. All I could think was, this is happening. And everything else became secondary. Work, ambitions, titles. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered was him. And Emily. At the time, Emily was still young, just starting to figure out her own life, her own direction. She needed stability. She needed someone to make sure her world didn't fall apart while her father's health slowly did. So I made another decision, one that didn't come with applause or recognition. I stepped back from my career. Not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece. I reduced my hours, turned down opportunities, passed on promotions I had once worked toward for years. "Are you sure about this?" one of my colleagues asked me. "You're so close to moving up." I smiled. "There will be other chances," I said. But deep down, I knew the truth. There wouldn't be. Not like this. Not again. My days became a careful balance between hospital shifts and home care. I would work long hours, then come home and take care of Thomas's medications, his meals, the quiet moments where he needed someone to just sit beside him and remind him he wasn't alone. At night, when the house was finally still, I would check on Emily. Homework, school projects, the little things that still mattered in a world that was slowly becoming more complicated than she should have had to understand. I tried to shield her from as much as I could. I wanted her childhood to remain intact for as long as possible, even as mine faded into something else. There were moments, small, quiet ones, when I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. Late nights, when I sat at the kitchen table exhausted, wondering how long I could keep going like this. But then Thomas would call my name, or Emily would need help with something, and the question would disappear. Because there was no alternative. This was my life now, and I embraced it. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Over time, Thomas's condition worsened. There were hospital stays, more treatments, moments of hope, followed by setbacks that felt harder each time. Through it all, I stayed, right there beside him, just like I had promised. On his better days, he would look at me with that familiar, gentle smile. "You don't have to do all of this, Isabella," he would say softly. "Yes, I do," I would reply. And we both knew why. Because love doesn't ask if it's convenient. It simply shows up. When Thomas passed, it felt like the ground beneath me had shifted completely. The house felt different. Too quiet. Too empty. But even then, I didn't allow myself to fall apart. Not fully. Because Emily still needed me. At least I thought she did. I continued working, though not at the same level as before. The opportunities I had once been offered no longer came. Or maybe they did, and I just wasn't looking in the right places anymore. It didn't matter. I had made my choices, and I didn't regret them. Not then. Not even now. But what I didn't realize, what I couldn't have imagined, was how those choices would be seen from the outside. From Emily's perspective. She hadn't seen the meetings, the decisions, the opportunities I turned down. She hadn't seen the nights I stayed awake, balancing everything, making sure nothing fell apart. All she saw was a mother who had stepped away. A woman who stayed home, who lived quietly, who didn't seem to have anything remarkable. And maybe that was my fault, because I never told her. I never explained the full story. I thought she would understand. Or maybe I thought it didn't matter. Because being her mother should have been enough. Their mother should have been enough. But somewhere along the way, that silence became something else. Something heavier. Something that allowed a different story to take its place. A story where I wasn't the woman who had sacrificed everything, but the one who had duped somewhere along the way. That silence became something else. Something heavier. Something that allowed a different story to take its place. A story where I wasn't the woman who had sacrificed everything, but the one who had never achieved anything. And once that version of me existed in her mind, it became easier for her to let go. Easier to believe that I didn't need to be included. that I didn't matter as much anymore. Sitting alone in my quiet living room now, I finally understood something I had missed for years. Sometimes, the things we choose not to say become the loudest truths in someone else's story. And by the time you realize it, they've already decided who you are, without ever knowing who you were. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. At first, I almost didn't notice it. It was tucked between a grocery store flyer and a utility bill, its envelope plain but heavier than the others. The return address caught my eye. St. Margaret's Medical Center. For a moment, I simply stared at it. I hadn't seen that name printed on anything addressed to me in years. Carefully, I set the other mail aside and picked up the envelope. My fingers hesitated just slightly before opening it, as if I already sensed that whatever was inside might disturb the quiet balance I had learned to live with. Inside was a formal letter, printed on thick, official paper. Dear Ms. Isabella Morrison, it began. Even seeing my full name written like that proper formal felt unfamiliar in a strange way. Most days, I was just Mom in my own mind, or sometimes nothing at all. I read the letter slowly, then again, and a third time, just to be sure I hadn't misunderstood. They were inviting me to attend a ceremony at the hospital, a special event, recognition of contributions. The wording was careful, almost vague in places, but one line stood out more than the rest. Your presence would be deeply meaningful as you are among a select group being honored. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter still in my hands. Honored. The word felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. Not to the woman who had spent her birthday alone just days earlier, staring at a cake with her name misspelled. I let out a soft breath and misspelled. I let out a soft breath and leaned back in my chair. Why now? I murmured. It had been years since I left St. Margaret's. Years since I had walked those halls, worn that uniform, made those decisions that once defined my entire identity, and in all that time leaned back in my chair. Why now? I murmured. It had been years since I left St. Margaret's. Years since I had walked those halls, worn that uniform, made those decisions that once defined my entire identity. And in all that time, nothing. No calls, no letters, no acknowledgement, just silence. So why now? I turned the paper over as if there might be more hidden on the back. But there wasn't. Just the same clean, official formatting. There was a date. 3 days from now. A time, a location, and a request for confirmation. I set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to fold it back into the envelope, set it aside, and continue with my quiet, predictable routine. Because showing up would mean stepping back into a part of my life I had long since closed off. A part that reminded me of who I used to be and who I no longer was. But another part of me, a quieter, more persistent voice, asked a different question. What if this matters? I hadn't felt that question in a long time. Not since before Thomas got sick. Not since before everything shifted. I stood up and walked to the sink, staring out the window as I tried to sort through the unfamiliar feeling rising inside me. Hope. Small. Fragile. But there. I didn't trust it. Hope had a way of making disappointment feel sharper. Still, it lingered. After a few minutes, I picked up the letter again and read it once more, this time more carefully. There was something about the tone, something that suggested this wasn't just a general invitation sent out to dozens of former staff members. This felt specific, intentional. I ran my fingers lightly over my name printed at the top. Isabella Morrison. For years, that name had been tied to a life of purpose, a life where I knew exactly who I was and what I was doing. Now it felt like a label I wasn't entirely sure I still fit. My phone sat on the table beside me. Without thinking too much about it, I picked it up and scrolled to Emily's contact. My thumb hovered for a moment before pressing call. The line rang longer than I expected. Once, twice, 3 times. I was just about to hang up when she answered. Hello? Her voice sounded distant, distracted. Hi, Emily, I said, trying to keep my tone light. It's Mom. Yeah, I know, she replied quickly. What's up? I'm kind of in the middle of something. Of course you are, I thought. I won't take long, I said. I received a letter today from the hospital I used to work at. There was a brief pause. And, she said, they invited me to a ceremony, I continued. Some kind of recognition event. Another pause. Longer this time. That it's nice, she said, though her voice didn't carry much interest. So, the word landed heavier than I expected. I was thinking of going, I said. Okay, she replied. I waited. For a question, for curiosity, for anything, but nothing came. I thought I'd let you know, I added, filling the silence. Yeah, that's fine, Mom, she said. I mean, if you want to go, you should go. There was a faint sound in the background, Daniel's voice, low and indistinct. Emily, we need to leave in 5, he said. I've got to go, she said quickly. We have something planned. Of course, I replied softly. I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah. Good luck with the thing, she said, her tone already shifting away. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a moment before setting it down slowly. Good luck with the thing. I let out a quiet, almost humorless breath. That was all it was to her. A thing. Not something important. Not something worth asking about. Just a thing. For a moment, doubt crept in again. Maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't anything meaningful. Maybe it was just a general event, something minor that didn't really matter. But then I looked back at the letter, at the careful wording, at the way my name was placed at the top as if it meant something again. And that small, fragile sense of hope returned. Stronger this time. Not loud, not overwhelming, but steady. I picked up my phone again this time, scrolling down to the contact information listed at the bottom of the letter. After a brief hesitation, I dialed the number. A receptionist answered. St. Margaret's Medical Center, how may I assist you? Hello, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. My name is Isabella Morrison. I received an invitation to attend a ceremony this week, and I'm calling to confirm. There was a pause as she typed something on her end. Yes, Ms. Morrison, she said a moment later, her tone shifting slightly. We've been expecting your call. Expecting. The word sent a small ripple through me. I'd like to attend, I said. Wonderful, she replied warmly. We look forward to seeing you. When I hung up, I realized something had changed. Just a little. The house still felt quiet, still empty in many ways. But the silence didn't feel quite as heavy as it had before. Because for the first time in a long while, I had somewhere to be. And for reasons I didn't yet fully understand, it felt like it might matter. The night before the ceremony, I barely slept. It wasn't nerves in the way I remembered from my working days, not the kind that came before a difficult procedure or a long shift. This was different, quieter, more uncertain. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of the streetlight outside, casting soft shadows across the room. My mind kept replaying the past few days. The letter, the call, Emily's indifferent voice. "Good luck with the thing." I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket closer. Was it just a thing, or was I about to step into something I didn't fully understand yet? By morning, I gave up on sleep altogether. I got out of bed early, moving slowly through the house. There was something deliberate about each action: making coffee, choosing what to wear, brushing my hair. As if I were preparing not just for an event, but for something that might shift the way I saw myself. I stood in front of my closet longer than usual. Most of my clothes were simple, practical, comfortable. They reflected the life I had been living for years. Quiet, unremarkable, unnoticed. But this felt different. After a while, I reached for a navy blue dress I hadn't worn in a long time. It was modest, but elegant in its own way. Thomas had once told me it made me look like someone who knows exactly what she's doing. I smiled faintly at the memory. "I hope you're right," I whispered. As I dressed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For a moment, I didn't see the woman who had been forgotten on her birthday. I saw someone else. Someone I almost recognized. Someone I used to be. That feeling stayed with me as I made my way downstairs. My phone sat on the kitchen counter silent. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. Maybe Emily would call today. Maybe she would remember something, ask where I was going, show a hint of curiosity. I unlocked the screen. Nothing. No missed calls. No messages. The same quiet emptiness. I exhaled slowly and set the phone back down. "All right," I said softly to myself. "That's fine, because at some point you stop waiting. Not because it stops hurting, but because you realize your life can't be built around someone else's absence." Still, before leaving, I did something I hadn't planned. I picked up the phone again and dialed Emily's number. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, voicemail. "Hi, it's Emily. I can't take your call right now." I almost hung up, but something inside me held on. "Hi, sweetheart," I said after the beep, my voice steady but softer than usual. "I just wanted to let you know I'm going to that hospital event today." I paused. I don't know exactly what it is, I admitted, but it feels important, at least to me. Another pause. "I wish you were here," I added quietly, "but I understand if you're busy." I swallowed, then finished simply. "Take care of yourself, okay?" I hung up before I could second-guess anything I had said. For a moment, I stood there holding the phone, listening to the silence that followed. Then I set it down and picked up my purse. It was time to go. The drive to St. Margaret's Medical Center felt longer than I remembered. Or maybe it was just that every mile carried a memory. I passed streets I hadn't driven down in years. Buildings that looked the same, yet somehow smaller than I remembered. Time has a way of reshaping places, not by changing them, but by changing you. When the hospital finally came into view, my hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. There it was. The same building where I had spent so many years of my life, where I had worked endless shifts, made impossible decisions, carried responsibilities that had once defined everything about me. I pulled into the parking lot and turned off the engine, sitting there for a moment as I let it all sink in. "You can do this," I whispered, even though I wasn't entirely sure what this was. As I stepped out of the car, a familiar scent hit me, the clean, sterile smell of a hospital mixed with something softer, something almost comforting. It was strange how quickly it came back. Like muscle memory, like a part of me that had never really left. Inside, the lobby had changed. It was brighter, more modern, but the feeling was the same. People moving quickly, purposefully, voices overlapping, life happening in every direction. For a moment, I felt out of place, like I didn't belong there anymore, like I was just a visitor. But before that thought could settle too deeply, a woman approached me. "Ms. Morrison?" she asked. I nodded, slightly surprised. "Yes." Her face lit up with a warm, genuine smile. "We've been expecting you," she said. Those words again. Expecting you. She handed me a small badge with my name on it, properly spelled this time, and gestured toward a door L'd this time, and gestured toward a hallway. "If you'll follow me, we'll get you checked in. The ceremony will begin shortly." I nodded and followed her, my steps slow but steady. As we walked, I noticed something else. People were looking at me, not in a curious or dismissive way, but with recognition. Respect. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A nod here, a polite smile there, as if they knew something about me that I didn't. "Right this way," the woman said, leading me into a large room filled with chairs and a small stage at the front. It was already partially filled with people, staff members, guests, individuals dressed in formal attire. There was a quiet energy in the room, the kind that builds before something important begins. I hesitated at the entrance. For a brief moment, doubt returned. What am I doing here? But then I remembered the letter. The way my name had been written. The way they had said had been written. The way they had said they were expecting me. And I took a step forward. Then another, until I was inside. The woman guided me to a seat near the far front. "Please make yourself comfortable, they were expecting me." And I took a step forward, then another, until I was inside. The woman guided me to a seat near the front. "Please make yourself comfortable," she said. "We'll be starting soon." I nodded, sitting down slowly. My hands rested in my lap, fingers lightly intertwined, as I looked around the room. The murmurs of conversation filled the air. Soft, anticipatory. I could feel my heart beating just a little faster. Not out of fear, but out of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. And as I sat there waiting for whatever was about to happen, I realized something important. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. Not here. Not today. And whatever came next was going to change everything. The room slowly filled until nearly every seat was taken. I sat quietly, my hands resting in my lap, trying to steady the rhythm of my breathing. Around me, people spoke in low voices, exchanging polite greetings, occasional laughter rising and fading like waves. But I felt separate from it all. Not excluded, just suspended. Like I was waiting for something I couldn't yet see. A man in a dark suit stepped onto the stage, adjusting the microphone slightly before speaking. "Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today." His voice carried easily across the room, warm and practiced. "We are gathered not just to celebrate progress and growth, but to honor the individuals whose actions, often unseen, often unrecognized, have shaped this institution in ways that continue to impact lives today. Unseen, unrecognized." The words settled into me more deeply than I expected. I shifted slightly in my seat, my attention sharpening. "We often think of legacy as something visible," he continued. "Buildings, titles, positions. But sometimes, the most important legacies are built in moments, decisions made under pressure, choices that change the course of someone's life forever." My heart began to beat a little faster. Why does this feel familiar? He paused, scanning the room before continuing. "Today, we honor a group of individuals whose contributions were not always acknowledged at the time they were made, but whose impact has proven undeniable. A quiet ripple moved through the audience. Applause followed, soft at first, then growing. I joined in, though my hands felt slightly unsteady. A group of names was called. One by one, people stood, walked to the stage, accepted plaques, shook hands, posed briefly for photos. I watched them carefully. Doctors, administrators, former staff members, people who had built careers, reputations, visible accomplishments, people who looked exactly like the kind of individuals you would expect to be honored. I sank a little deeper into my seat. Maybe Emily was right, I thought. Maybe this is just a general event. Maybe I'm just one of many. The thought didn't hurt as much as I expected, because at least I was here. At least for once I wasn't completely invisible. The ceremony continued. More names, more applause, more stories briefly summarized, highlighting achievements, innovations, leadership. And yet, there was a shift in the tone. Subtle at first, but noticeable. The man at the podium returned after the initial presentations, his expression slightly more serious now. There is one story, he said, that deserves special attention today. The room quieted almost instantly. This is not a story of a long list of titles or promotions, he continued. In fact, at the time it happened, it was barely acknowledged at all. Something inside me tightened. A number of years ago, he said slowly, a critical case arrived in our emergency department. A young patient facing a life-threatening condition. The situation was complex, the information incomplete, and time extremely limited. My breath caught. No, it couldn't be. The attending team faced a decision. He went on. Wait for full authorization and risk losing the patient or act immediately, stepping beyond standard protocol. The room was completely silent now. Every word felt heavier than the last, and one individual, he said, his voice lowering slightly, made a choice. My hands tightened together in my lap. A choice that could have cost her career. A faint ringing filled my ears. A choice that went unrecognized for years. My heart pounded. A choice that saved a child's life. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because I knew. Before he said anything else, I knew. The patient survived. He continued, recovered, lived a full life. A pause. And today, that life stands among us. The room stirred slightly. Confused murmurs. People looking around, trying to understand. The man on stage smiled faintly. And more importantly, he added, that life has chosen to honor the person who made that moment possible. My chest felt tight. Too tight. Would Nathaniel Brooks please come forward? The name echoed through the room, and then a man stood up from the audience. Tall, composed, confident, he walked toward the stage with a quiet sense of purpose. His presence commanding attention without needing to demand it. I stared at him, my mind struggling to connect the image in front of me with the memory I carried. The small boy on that hospital bed, the fragile life I had once held in my hands. This was him, grown, alive, standing. The room filled with applause as he reached the stage, shaking hands with the presenter before turning to face the audience. My name is Nathaniel Brooks. He said, his voice steady but carrying a depth of emotion that was impossible to miss. And I'm here today because someone chose not to wait. My vision blurred slightly. Not from confusion, from something else. Something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Recognition. I was 10 years old, he continued, and I don't remember much about that night, but I've spent my entire life hearing about it. He paused, glancing down briefly before continuing. My mother told me there was a nurse, someone who saw what others didn't, who acted when others hesitated. A faint tremor entered his voice, someone who refused to let me become a what if. The room was completely still. No one moved. No one spoke. Her name, he said softly, was Isabella Morrison. The words seemed to echo, louder than anything that had come before. Every head in the room turned toward me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. Didn't know how to react. Because for so many years, that moment had belonged only to me. A quiet memory, unspoken, unseen, and now it was being brought into the light for everyone to see. Nathaniel stepped forward slightly, his eyes searching the room. "I've spent years trying to find her," he said, trying to understand how someone could make that kind of decision and then just disappear back into their life without asking for anything in return. My hands trembled, just slightly. "But I understand now," he continued. "Because people like that don't do what they do for recognition." A pause. "They do it because it's who they are." The room erupted into applause, but I barely heard it. Because in that moment, something inside me broke. Not in pain, but in release. Years of silence. Years of being unseen. Years of wondering if anything I had done had truly mattered. All of it came rushing to the surface. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't invisible. I was seen. Fully. Completely. And there was no way to hide from it anymore. "Ms. Morrison," the man at the podium said gently, "would you please join us on stage?" Every eye was still on me. Every breath in the room seemed to pause. And slowly, I stood up. Standing up felt harder than I expected. Not because my body wouldn't move, but because something inside me resisted the moment. For years, I had learned how to shrink quietly into the background, to take up less space, to expect less. And now, suddenly, all of that was being undone in a single instant. Every eye in the room followed me as I stepped into the aisle. I could feel it, not judgment, not curiosity, but something far more unfamiliar. Respect. My legs felt slightly unsteady at first, but I kept moving. One step, then another. The sound of applause surrounded me, growing louder with each second, yet somehow distant, like it belonged to someone else. This isn't real, I thought, but it was. When I reached the stage, Nathaniel was already there waiting. Up close, I could see the emotion in his eyes, the same depth I remembered in his mother's face all those years ago. Gratitude, yes, but something more than that. Recognition. The kind that sees you not just for what you did, but for who you were in that moment. "Ms. Morrison," the man at the podium said gently, offering his hand. I shook it, my grip steady despite the storm of emotion building inside me. "Thank you for joining us," he added. I nodded, unable to find my voice just yet. Nathaniel stepped closer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled softly, sincerely. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you," he said. His voice was calm, but I could hear the weight behind it. I looked at him, really looked at him. The child I had once known was gone, but the life I had helped protect was standing right in front of me. "I remember your mother," I said quietly. He nodded. "She remembers you every day," he replied. Something in my chest tightened. "They told me what you did," he continued. "How you made a decision no one else was willing to make." I shook my head slightly. "I did what I thought was right," I said, And that's exactly why it mattered, he said gently. The room remained silent, hanging on to every word. The man at the podium stepped forward again. Today, he announced, we are not only recognizing an individual, we are correcting a silence. The words struck something deep inside me. Correcting a silence. He gestured toward a screen behind us. A photograph appeared. Old, slightly grainy, but unmistakable. It was me, standing in a hospital corridor, younger, focused, unaware that the moment had been captured at all. A ripple moved through the audience. That image, he said, was taken shortly after the procedure that saved Nathaniel Brooks' life. At the time, there was no official acknowledgement, no award, no headline. He paused. But impact doesn't disappear just because it isn't recorded. I felt my throat tighten. Over the years, he continued, Nathaniel went on to build a life, one that was only possible because of that decision. He turned slightly toward Nathaniel. And today, he has chosen to give back to this institution in a way that ensures that moment and the person behind it will never be forgotten again. I frowned, slightly confusion flickering through me. What does he mean? Nathaniel took a small step forward, addressing the audience. A few years ago, he began, I established a foundation focused on supporting critical care services for children. The room leaned in. But I always knew that if I ever had the chance, I wanted to do something more personal. He glanced at me briefly before continuing. Something that honored the person who gave me a future. My heart began to race again. Today, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'm proud to announce that the new pediatric wing at St. Margaret's Medical Center will officially be named. Today, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'm proud to announce that the new pediatric wing at St. Margaret's Medical Center will officially be named. He paused. The silence stretched. Every second felt longer than the last. The Isabella Morrison wing. The world seemed to stop. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything, couldn't see anything clearly. Just those words. My name. Attached to something real, something permanent, something that would exist long after this moment passed. The room erupted into applause, louder than anything before. But I stood there frozen, my mind struggling to catch up with what I had just heard. This can't be real. This can't be happening. Nathaniel turned toward me again, his expression soft. You gave me my life, he said quietly. This is just a small way of making sure your name is never forgotten. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. Not from sadness, but from something deeper. Something that had been building for years without me realizing it. Relief. Validation. A sense that everything I had done, every sacrifice, every silent moment, every choice that no one saw, had mattered. More than I ever knew. I don't know what to say, I whispered. You don't have to say anything, he replied gently. But the man at the podium smiled. I think we'd all like to hear from Miss Morrison, he said. The microphone was placed in front of me. I stared at it for a moment. How do you put a lifetime into words? How do you explain something you never expected to explain? I took a slow breath, then another, and finally I spoke. I spent many years believing that some of the most important moments in life go unnoticed. I began, my voice soft but steady. The room quieted instantly. And maybe that's true, I continued. Maybe they do. I glanced at Nathaniel. But that doesn't mean they don't matter. A pause. Because sometimes the impact of those moments doesn't show up right away. I looked out at the audience, at the faces watching me. Sometimes it takes years. My voice trembled slightly. Sometimes it takes a lifetime. The silence in the room felt different now. Not empty, but full. I didn't make that decision for recognition, I said. I made it because someone needed help and I was there. I swallowed, my chest tightening. And if I had to do it again, I wouldn't change a thing. The applause that followed wasn't just loud, it was meaningful. And as I stood there surrounded by it, I realized something I hadn't understood before. This moment wasn't just about the past. It was about reclaiming something I had lost. Not my career, not my title, but my sense of worth, my identity, my truth. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt whole again. After the applause faded, the world didn't return to normal. It shifted, subtly but permanently. I stepped down from the stage with Nathaniel beside me, my legs still unsteady, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming weight of what had just happened. People approached almost immediately, hands reaching out, voices warm. "Ms. Morrison, that was incredible. Thank you for what you did. You're an inspiration." I nodded, smiled, responded politely, but everything felt slightly unreal, like I was watching someone else move through the moment. Because for years, I had lived in silence, and now, suddenly, there was noise, recognition, validation. It was more than I knew how to hold all at once. Nathaniel stayed close almost instinctively, as if he understood I needed something steady to anchor me. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. I let out a soft breath. "I think so," I said. "I just didn't expect any of this." He smiled gently. "I don't think moments like this are meant to be expected," he said. We moved to the side of the room where things were quieter. From there, I could see the stage, the audience, the people still talking about what had just been announced. The Isabella Morrison wing. My name still echoed in my mind as if it hadn't fully settled into reality yet. "How did you find me?" I asked after a moment. Nathaniel leaned slightly against the wall, his expression thoughtful. "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "Your records were incomplete, almost like you had disappeared." I gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "I suppose I did," I said. He shook his head. "No," he replied. "You didn't disappear. You just stopped being seen." The words landed with quiet precision, because they were true. "I spoke to people who had worked here back then," he continued. "Some remembered the case. Some remembered you. But no one seemed to know where you had gone." "I didn't go anywhere special," I said softly. "I just went home." He studied me for a moment. "And that was enough for you?" he asked. I paused. For years, I would have said yes without hesitation. But now I thought it was. I admitted. A silence settled between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. "There's something else," Nathaniel said after a moment. I looked at him. "What is it?" He hesitated just briefly. "I invited someone today," he said. My chest tightened slightly. "Who?" Before he could answer, I heard a voice behind me. "Mom." Everything inside me froze. I turned slowly. And there she was, Emily, standing just a few steps away. Her expression was different. Not distant, not distracted. Something else entirely. Something I hadn't seen in her eyes in a long time. Uncertainty, and something that looked dangerously close to regret. "Emily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She stepped closer, her gaze flickering briefly toward Nathaniel, then back to me. I didn't know, she said. Her voice trembled slightly. I didn't know any of this. I felt my heart tighten again, but this time, it wasn't from pain. It was from something more complicated. I never told you, I said quietly. She shook her head. No, she said. You didn't. Her eyes filled with tears. But you should have. The words weren't harsh. They weren't accusatory. They were honest. And they hurt more because of that. I thought it didn't matter, I said. It matters, she replied immediately. It matters a lot. The silence between us grew heavier. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. How do you bridge years of misunderstanding in a single conversation? Nathaniel stepped back slightly, giving us space. I need to say something, Emily continued, her voice steadier now. And I don't know if it's too late, but I need to say it anyway. I nodded slowly. I'm listening. She took a deep breath. I thought you didn't do anything with your life, she admitted. I thought you just stayed home. Each word landed like a quiet echo of everything I had feared. I didn't understand why she went on. I didn't ask. I just assumed. A tear slipped down her cheek. And I built this version of you in my mind that wasn't real. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even hurt exactly, just clarity. I see that now, she said, her voice breaking slightly. And I'm so sorry. For a moment, neither of us moved. Because apologies, no matter how sincere, don't erase the past. But they can open a door. Slowly, I stepped closer to her. You didn't know, I said softly. That's not an excuse, she replied quickly. No, I said, but it's a reason. She looked at me, searching my face for something. Forgiveness? Understanding? Maybe both. I should have told you, I admitted. I should have trusted you with the truth. Her expression shifted slightly. Why didn't you? She asked. I hesitated, because the answer wasn't simple. Because I didn't think I needed to, I said finally. I thought being your mother was enough. She shook her head, a sad, small smile forming. It should have been, she said. We stood there for a moment, both caught in the space between what was and what could have been. Then slowly, Emily stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It was unexpected, and for a second, I didn't react. Not because I didn't want to, but because I had forgotten what it felt like. Then gently, I hugged her back, and just like that, something that had been broken for a long time began to mend. Not completely, not instantly, but enough to feel it. I missed your birthday, she whispered against my shoulder. I know, I replied softly. I didn't forget, she added quickly. I thought we'd celebrate later. And then, her voice trailed off. Life got in the way, I finished for her. She nodded. I'm sorry, she said again. I pulled back slightly, looking at her. I believe you, I said, and I did. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't the mistake. It's the moment you finally see it clearly. Nathaniel approached again, his presence calm and steady. I'm glad you came, because sometimes the hardest part isn't the mistake. It's the moment you finally see it clearly. Nathaniel approached again, his presence calm and steady. I'm glad you came, he said to Emily. She wiped her eyes quickly, offering a small, grateful smile. Thank you, she said, for finding her, For doing this. He shook his head. No, he replied. Thank her. I'm just living the life she gave me. We all stood there for a moment, the weight of everything settling into something quieter, something steadier. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel alone. Not in the room. Not in my life. Not in my story. Because now, it was finally being shared. The ceremony ended, but the moment didn't. People continued to approach me long after the official program was over. Conversations flowed, introductions were made. Hands were shaken. Yet through it all, I remained aware of one thing. Emily hadn't left my side. Not once. At first, it felt unfamiliar, strange even. For so long, our interactions had been brief, distracted, distant. She was always somewhere else, mentally, emotionally, physically. But now, she stayed. Quietly. Present. And every time someone spoke to me, I could feel her watching, not with impatience, not with obligation, but with something deeper. Understanding. Or at least, the beginning of it. You were amazing up there, she said softly at one point when we finally had a moment alone. I let out a small breath. I didn't feel amazing, I admitted. She smiled faintly. I think that's what made it real, she said. Her words lingered with me, because for so many years I had tried to make things feel manageable, controlled, contained. And yet today, everything had been raw, unfiltered. And somehow, that had been enough. Can we walk? She asked after a moment. I nodded. We moved out of the main hall and into a quieter corridor of the hospital. The noise of the event faded behind us, replaced by the familiar rhythm of a working facility, distant footsteps, muted voices, the soft hum of machines. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just walked, side by side, like we used to. This place, Emily said, eventually glancing around. It's strange being here? How so? I asked. She hesitated. I feel like I'm seeing a version of you I never knew existed, she admitted. I smiled gently. That version was always there, I said. I know, she replied. I just never looked for it. There was no defensiveness in her voice, no attempt to justify, just honesty. And that mattered more than anything. We reached a large glass window overlooking a newly constructed section of the hospital. The sunlight poured in, illuminating a wing that looked modern, bright, full of life. Emily stopped. Is that? She began. I followed her gaze. A sign was mounted above the entrance. Clear, unmistakable. Isabella Morrison Pediatric Wing. My breath caught. Even after hearing it announced, seeing it was something else entirely. Real. Permanent. A part of the world that would continue long after I was gone. It's your name, Emily said softly. I nodded. I know, but even as I said it, it didn't feel like something I owned. It felt like something I had been given, something I had never asked for. You deserve it, she said. I turned to look at her. Do I asked quietly. Yes, she said without hesitation. More than anyone I've ever known. Her certainty caught me off guard, because for years I hadn't felt deserving of anything beyond the life I had quietly accepted. I wish I had known, she added, her voice softer now. Known what? I asked. Who's softer now? Known what I asked? who you really were, she said. The words hung in the air between us. I thought about them carefully before answering. You knew who I was, I said. You just didn't know everything I had done. She shook her head. That's not the same, you really were, she said. The words hung in the air between us. I thought about them carefully before answering. You knew who I was, I said. You just didn't know everything I had done. She shook her head. That's not the same, she said. I saw you as small. The word was honest, painfully so. I thought you had given up on things, she continued. That you had settled. I let out a slow breath. I did settle, I said, but not in the way you thought. She frowned slightly. What do you mean I chose a different kind of life, I explained, one that didn't come with titles or recognition. I paused. But that doesn't mean it was less meaningful. Emily looked at me for a long moment. I see that now, she said quietly, and for the first time, I believed her. We stood there in silence, both looking at the name on the building. Then, unexpectedly, Emily spoke again. Daniel didn't think I should come today. I turned to her. Why not? He said it wasn't necessary, she replied, that it was just a hospital event and we had other plans. A small, familiar ache returned, but it didn't settle as deeply as it once would have. And what did you say, I asked? She hesitated. At first, I agreed, she admitted, but then she looked at me. I couldn't stop thinking about your message. My message. I listened to it again this morning, she said. The way you said it felt important, even if you didn't know why. I swallowed. I almost didn't come, she added. But you did, I said softly. She nodded, and I'm so glad I did. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, because she understood now. Not just what had happened today, but what she had almost missed. I don't want to miss things like this again, she said. I studied her face carefully. You won't, I said. Not because I was certain, but because I wanted to believe it. She reached for my hand, then tentatively at first, as if unsure whether the gesture would be welcome. I didn't hesitate. I held hers gently. And in that simple act, something solid formed between us. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. Why didn't you ever tell me about Dad, about everything you went through when he was sick? She asked. I looked down for a moment, because that question carried more weight than anything else she had asked so far. I didn't want you to feel burdened, I said finally. You were young. You deserved to have your own life. But I would have understood, she said. Maybe, I replied. Or maybe it would have changed things in ways I couldn't control. She squeezed my hand slightly. It already changed things, she said. Just differently. I nodded, because she was right. Silence doesn't prevent change. It just shapes it in ways you can't always predict. I can't change the past, I said. I know, she replied, but we can change what happens next. Her words were simple, but they carried something powerful. Choice. We stood there a little longer, looking out at the wing that now carried my name, a symbol of something I had never expected, a reminder of a life I had once lived, and perhaps a beginning of something new. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just remembering who I had been. I was starting to understand who I still was, and maybe, just maybe, that was the most important recognition of all. We left the hospital later than I expected. The sun was already beginning to dip, casting a soft golden glow across the parking lot. For a moment, I stood still beside my car, looking back at the building, at the wing, at my name. Even now, it didn't feel entirely real. "Do you want me to drive with you?" Emily asked gently. I turned to her. Her tone wasn't rushed, not distracted, just present. "No," I said softly. "I think I need a little time to process everything." She nodded immediately. "Okay," she said, "but can I come by later?" The question caught me off guard, not because of what it meant, but because of how naturally she asked it, like it wasn't an obligation, like it was something she genuinely wanted. "I'd like that," I replied. She smiled, a small, quiet smile that reminded me of when she was younger, before everything became complicated. "I'll bring dinner," she added, "and maybe we can talk more." "I'd like that too," I said. For a moment, we just stood there, neither of us rushing to leave. Then she stepped forward and hugged me again. This time, it felt easier, more natural, and when she pulled away, there was something different in her eyes. Not just regret anymore, but intention. "I'll see you tonight," she said. "I'll be there," I replied. As she walked away, I realized something important. This wasn't just a moment of emotion. It was a decision, a choice to show up. And that mattered more than anything she could have said. I got into my car, slowly sitting there for a moment before starting the engine. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, not empty, just quiet, peaceful. As I drove home, my mind replayed the day in fragments. The letter, the ceremony, Nathaniel, Emily, the wing. Each moment layered on top of the next, forming something I hadn't felt in years. A sense of continuity, like my past, my present, and my future were finally connected again. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. Still, simple, unchanged. But I wasn't. I stepped inside, placing my keys on the table, and paused. The silence greeted me, but this time it didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. Space for something new. I walked into the kitchen, instinctively reaching for the counter where the birthday cake had sat just a few days ago. Gone now. Just like that moment. But somehow, it didn't hurt the same way. Because that moment no longer defined the whole story. It was just one piece of it. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the table, letting everything settle. For years, I had believed that my life had quietly narrowed, that it had become smaller, less significant, less meaningful. But today had shown me something different. It hadn't become smaller. It had just gone unseen. And there was a difference, a deep, important difference. My phone buzzed gently on the table. I looked down. A message from an unknown number. For a second, I hesitated. Then I opened it. "Ms. Morrison, this is Nathaniel. I just wanted to thank you again for everything. Today meant more to me than I can fully express." I read the message twice, then a third time, and something warm settled in my chest. I typed back slowly. "Thank you for finding me." A moment passed. Then another message appeared. "I wasn't finding you," he wrote. "I was honoring you." "There's a difference." I smiled softly. Because he was right. For so long, I had thought of myself as someone who had been forgotten. But today, I had been remembered. And not just remembered, valued, respected, seen. A second message followed. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to stay in touch. There's more I'd like to share with you about what your decision made possible. I paused, considering. Then I replied, I would like that very much. I set the phone down, leaning back slightly in my chair. The house no longer felt like a place I had retreated to. It felt like a place I had chosen. And that shift changed everything. A few hours later, there was a knock at the door. I stood up, smoothing my hands over my dress before walking toward it. When I opened the door, Emily stood there holding a bag of takeout in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. I wasn't sure what you'd want, she said, a little uncertain. So I brought options. I smiled. That's perfect, I said. She stepped inside, glancing around the house as if seeing it with fresh eyes. It's nice here, she said. It always has been, I replied. She nodded slowly. I just never really noticed. There it was again. Honesty. Not easy, but real. We moved into the kitchen together, unpacking the food, setting things on the table. For a moment, it felt like we were learning each other all over again. And in many ways, we were. As we sat down to eat, Emily hesitated before speaking. There's something I need to tell you, she said. I looked at her. What is it? She took a deep breath. I've been unhappy, she admitted. The words surprised me, not because they were impossible, but because she had never said them out loud before. Daniel and we've been drifting for a while, she continued. I just didn't want to admit it. I listened quietly, not interrupting, not judging. I think somewhere along the way I started measuring everything by the wrong things, she said. Success, appearances, what people expect. She looked up at me. And I did that with you too. I nodded slowly. I know. Her eyes filled slightly. I don't want to do that anymore, she said. I don't want to miss what actually matters. A long silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something new. Awareness, choice, possibility. You don't have to have everything figured out right away, I said gently. I know, she replied, but I want to start somewhere. I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. You already have, I said. She smiled faintly, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like we were standing on opposite sides of something. It felt like we were finally standing on the same ground, together. That night didn't end with dinner. It lingered, in the quiet pauses between sentences, in the way Emily stayed seated even after her plate was empty, in the way neither of us seemed in a hurry to return to our separate lives. We sat at the kitchen table long after the food had gone cold, talking in a way we hadn't in years. Not small talk, not careful surface-level exchanges. Real conversation. The kind that takes effort. The kind that requires honesty. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, Emily said, tracing the edge of her glass with her finger. About choosing a different kind of life. I nodded slowly. What about it? I think I misunderstood what success really means, she admitted. Her voice was quiet but steady. For a long time, I thought it was about what people could see, she continued. The house, the job, the image, everything that looks right from the outside. She let out a small, almost self-conscious laugh. Daniel believes that too. I didn't respond immediately because I had seen it, felt it, lived in the shadow of that belief without fully naming it. And I followed that she went on, without questioning it. She looked up at me. But today, everything shifted. There was something different in her eyes now. Not confusion, not doubt, clarity. I watched people look at you like you mattered, she said, like you had done something extraordinary. I held her gaze. And you didn't even try to make it about yourself, she added. You just stood there, calm, almost like it didn't change who you were at all. I smiled faintly. Because it didn't, I said. She shook her head. It should have changed how I saw you, she replied. The honesty in her voice hit deeper than any apology could have. Because it wasn't just about regret anymore. It was about understanding. I wish I had asked more questions, she said softly. I wish I had listened. You're listening now? I replied. She nodded slowly. I am. A quiet silence followed. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt necessary, like we were both sitting with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid for too long. After a moment, Emily spoke again. There's something else I need to tell you, she said. I waited. I don't think my marriage is what I thought it was, she admitted. The words hung in the air, carefully chosen, but heavy. I didn't react immediately, not because I didn't care, but because I wanted her to continue in her own time. I thought Daniel was strong, she said, confident, someone who knew what he wanted. She paused. And maybe he is. Another pause. But I don't think he knows how to value anything that doesn't fit his idea of success. I felt a quiet understanding settle in, because I had seen it long before she had. He didn't want me to come today, she added. I know, I said gently. She looked surprised. You do? I could tell, I replied. She let out a breath. I almost didn't come, she admitted again. But something about your voice in that message, it didn't feel like something I could ignore. I swallowed. I'm glad you didn't. So am I, she said. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression thoughtful. I think I've been living a life that looks right, she said, but doesn't feel right. I nodded. That happens more often than people admit, I said. She looked at me carefully. Did you ever feel that way? She asked. I considered the question. Yes, I said, finally. But not in the way you think. She waited. I chose a life that didn't always look impressive, I explained. But it felt right to me, even when it was hard. I paused. That's the difference. She absorbed that slowly. So, what do I do now? She asked. It wasn't a dramatic question. It wasn't desperate. It was honest, and that made it more important. You don't have to figure everything out tonight, I said. She nodded. But you do have to be honest with yourself, I continued. About what matters. About what you want your life to feel like, not just how it looks. She looked down at the table thinking. I think I've been afraid to do that, she admitted. Most people are, I said gently. She smiled faintly. Even you, she asked. Even me, I replied. That seemed to comfort her, because for the first time, she wasn't trying to measure herself against an impossible standard. She was just being. After a while, Emily stood up and began helping me clear the table. The movements were simple, familiar, almost routine, but there was something meaningful in them, because she wasn't doing it out of obligation. She was choosing to stay, choosing to help, choosing to be present. When we finished, she lingered near the doorway. I should go, she said softly. I nodded, but neither of us moved right away. I'll come by again tomorrow, she added, if that's okay. It's more than okay, I said. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. As she stepped outside, she turned back. "I'm really proud of you," she said. The words were simple, but they carried something I hadn't realized I needed. Not validation from the world, but from her. "Thank you," I replied. She hesitated for a second, then added quietly, "I'm just sorry it took me so long to say it." I walked over and hugged her again. "It's okay," I said softly, because in that moment, it truly was. After she left, I closed the door gently and leaned against it for a moment. The house was quiet again, but not in the same way it had been before. This time, the silence felt full of possibility, full of change, full of something that had been missing for a long time. Hope. Not the fragile kind I had tried to protect before, but something stronger, something grounded, something real. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just remembering the life I had lived. I was stepping into the life that was still waiting for me. And this time, I wouldn't be invisible. Not to the world, and not to the people who mattered most. The next morning felt different. Not dramatically, not in a way that would be obvious to anyone passing by. But to me, everything had shifted. I woke up before my alarm sunlight already spilling gently through the curtains. For a moment, I lay there still and quiet, letting the memory of yesterday settle into something real. The hospital, the ceremony, Emily, my name on that building. I closed my eyes briefly, almost afraid that if I moved too quickly, it might all fade like a dream. But it didn't. It stayed. Steady. Certain. I sat up slowly, my body moving with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. There was no heaviness in my chest this morning, no lingering ache of being forgotten. I sat up slowly, my body moving with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. There was no heaviness in my chest this morning, no lingering ache of being forgotten. Just clarity. As I made my way to the kitchen, I noticed something small but meaningful. My phone. There was a message waiting from Emily. "I'm thinking about you this morning. I hope you slept well. Can I come by later? I'd love to spend the day together." I read it twice, then once more. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to feel it fully. This wasn't obligation. This wasn't guilt. This was choice. And that made all the difference. I typed back simply, "I would love that." A moment later, 3 small dots appeared. Then another message. "Ill brings Sophie." My heart softened instantly. Sophie. I hadn't seen her properly in so long. "Perfect," I replied. I set the phone down and stood there for a moment, letting that simple exchange settle into something meaningful. Because it was. It meant something had changed. Not just yesterday, but today. And hopefully, moving forward. A few hours later, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the quiet. I stepped outside just as Emily got out, Sophie hopping excitedly behind her. Grandma Sophie shouted, running toward me. I knelt down just in time to catch her in my arms. She felt warm, real, present. "I missed you," she said, her small voice full of sincerity. "I missed you too," I replied, holding her a little tighter than usual. Emily watched us from a few steps away, her expression soft, grateful. and maybe a little emotional. "Come inside," I said, standing up. The house filled with a different kind of energy almost instantly. Laughter, movement, life. Sophie explored every corner as if she had never been there before, asking questions, touching things, bringing a sense of joy that had been absent for far too long. Emily followed me into the kitchen. "I told Daniel I needed space today," she said quietly. I nodded. "How did he take it?" She shrugged slightly. "Not well," she admitted, but I didn't change my mind. I studied her for a moment. "You don't have to make any decisions right away," I said gently. "I know," she replied, "but I do need to start making different ones." There it was again. Choice. And this time, she was choosing herself. Choosing what felt right, not what looked right. We spent the afternoon together in a way that felt both new and familiar. Sophie insisted we play a game in the living room. Emily helped me prepare lunch. At one point, we all sat together laughing about something small and unimportant, and yet it felt like everything. Because it was real. Later, as Sophie napped on the couch, Emily and I sat quietly nearby. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "What is it?" I asked. "I want to understand more about your life," she said. "Not just what happened at the hospital, but everything." I smiled softly. "That might take some time," I said. "I have time," she replied. And for the first time, I believed her, because she wasn't rushing anymore. She wasn't distracted. She was present, and that was all I had ever wanted. As the day slowly came to an end, Emily stood by the door preparing to leave. "This won't be the last time," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a promise. "I know," I replied. She hugged me tightly, and then softly she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I never did," I said. Because I hadn't. Not even when it felt like she had given up on me. After they left, the house grew quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of something that had been missing for a long time. Connection. Meaning. Hope. I walked to the window, looking out at the fading light. Somewhere in the distance, life continued, as it always had. But inside me, something had changed. Not because the world had suddenly recognized me, not because my name was on a building, but because I had finally been seen by the one person who mattered most. And in the end, I realized something simple. Recognition from the world is powerful, but recognition from the people you love, that's what truly heals you. That's what brings you back to yourself. That's what reminds you. You were never invisible. Not really. Just waiting to be seen. After everything that happened, I've had a lot of time to reflect not just on my life, but on the choices we all make without realizing how deeply they shape the people around us. Sometimes we think love is understood without being spoken. We assume the people closest to us see our sacrifices, our intentions, our quiet acts of care. But the truth is, they don't always. Not because they don't love us, but because life moves fast, perspectives shift, and silence can create stories that were never meant to exist. For years, I believed that what I had done didn't need recognition, that doing the right thing was enough. And in many ways, it is. But I've also learned something just as important. Being seen matters. Being understood matters. And sometimes we have to share our story not to prove our worth, but to let the people we love truly know us. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Don't wait until it's too late to ask questions. Don't assume you already know someone's life just because you see the surface. And most importantly, Don't let silence define the people you love. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Have you ever misunderstood someone close to you or felt misunderstood yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the stories we need the most are the ones that remind us we're not alone.